Hello, in this video, I'm going to show you detailed steps required to integrate the Google's Calendar API in your Angular application. So we are going to take a very simple use case where we have a simple UI like this, where we'll accept a time on which time a user want to schedule an event or appointment, and who are the attendees, what are their email IDs. And once the user provide that, we are going to schedule an appointment. And after scheduling appointment, user will get an email on their email address that something event has scheduled, and it will also be reflected in their calendar. So this is really practical and a useful application. You must have seen this on the multiple websites, like if you have to schedule appointment for your vaccination, COVID vaccination, if you have to schedule appointment with your doctor, let's say you have a healthcare application, or let it be any application, like if you want to schedule an interview, then you can prompt your user to use this kind of a UI where they can select the meeting time, and then they provide the email address and they automatically get an invitation and it's reflected in their calendar. So how all this happens, I'm going to show all the technicalities, all the details about it, how to use a Google Calendar API. So let's go to the official documentation of the Google Calendars API, and I'll be giving the link of this documentation in the description so that you can go there and read it. So what it says is it gives you a JavaScript quick start. Since Angular comes under the JavaScript category, we are referring to a JavaScript quick start. If you want to integrate it with something different like a Go or the Java, Node.js, Python, Android, iOS, then the steps would be different. So for this sake of this tutorial, we are going to stick with the JavaScript quick start. So it tells you what are the prerequisites that we need to do in order to set it. First thing what we have to do is we have to enable the API. So for that, it says that we need to turn on the Google Cloud project. You can turn on the one or more APIs in a single Google Cloud project. In the Google Cloud console, enable the Google Calendar API. So we have to just click on this enable the API button, and it will take you to your developer console where it prompt you to enable access to API. So we have the confirm project and then the enable API. So you need to create a project in your developer console. If you don't have it, then you can simply just create from here. There's an option for the new project. In my case, I already have one created, so I'm not going to create a new project, but that's very easy what I mean to say. So you just confirm it, you click on the next, and then you just enable it. So it's just like an permission that you are providing to your developer console to make it accessible to use the Google Calendar API via your client ID and your secret. So now it's enabled. Let's go to the second step. So in the second step, we have to configure the OAuth Consent screen. So for that, we have to go to our Google Cloud Console, and in that, in our menu, we have to go to API and Services, OAuth Consent screen. So I'll go to the OAuth Consent screen. So I have it open here. There we simply have to provide a name of our application. So for this demo, I'm going to call it Calendar Demo App, and then we have to give an support email address. So I have provided my email address. You can give an logo of your application if you want to. Then this is the thing that we have to compulsory do, else Google will not be able to identify that who is using this client ID and whether it's genuine or not. So we have to provide the domain of our application. So for this demo, as I'm doing the things on my local host, I'm giving a local host 4200. But if you are planning to make your application production ready, this domain should be a public domain, or the domain that you are owner of, or the domain that you have registered. So make use of that domain here. You can add a developer contact information here, but that is optional. So I'll just put it save and continue. Then we go to the scopes. Now scope is the part where we define that if I'm going to create a OAuth consent client ID, then what are the APIs of the Google that this particular client ID is allowed to make use of. We have to decide the permissions for our request. So with this, we basically allow our app to use the Google's resources and the user data from the Google account. So that's what scopes mean. We just tell Google that these are the stuff, these are the things that this client ID is going to make use of, and you please enable all this permission for this client ID. So in my case, what I did is I added all the Google Calendar API related permissions. So once you have your intended scopes added, you can simply save it. Then test users, we have to add a test users here, because when we are going to test our application in a local instance, we need some email IDs that will be allowed, because when we create this OAuth consent screen, it is basically in the test mode, it's not production ready yet. And if we have to test it, then we have to tell user that okay, you can allow this Google account to be used in a testing environment. And if you don't do that, then Google basically tells you that it will not allow you to test your application because it's not added in the test user. So we have to add it in our test users in order to test it. So I just added my email ID there and simply click on add and close. Then we go to save and continue again. Then in the summary we get like what are all things that we have configured, and that's all we need to do on this screen. So we can go to back to dashboard. So yeah, that's it. Let's go to our documentation again and see what is the next step. So after having an OAuth consent screen created, these are just the steps that I just explained from 1 to 6 what you need to do. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Then we have to authorize the credential for a web application. So what we need to do is now we have to create an credential for our OAuth consent screen. So we have to create a OAuth client ID. So we can simply click on this go to credential button and it will navigate us to an exact screen. So here we have to click on create credential, and then we have to click on OAuth client ID. Once we do the OAuth client ID, then it opens this page where it asks that what is your application type. So since in our application in our case it's a web application, I'll choose a web application. Then let's provide the name of our application. So again, let me call this demo calendar event, and then we have to add the authorized JavaScript origin. So in my case, I'm going to show it on my local host. So I'll simply put a HTTP local host. I'm going to remove this S because it's running on my local and it doesn't have any SSL certificate. So it's just a HTTP local host. Then authorized redirect URI, it means that once an authentication or the user gives a consent to Google on allowing to read write their calendar event, then what is the another domain? So in the authorized redirect URI, again, I'm going to provide the HTTP local host 4200. I guess I forgot the port number here, so I'll simply put that here in my authorized JavaScript origin. I'm good with authorized redirect URIs also. Then I'll simply click on create, and this will create an OAuth client ID for me. So it shows you that client ID here, and you can also download it if you want, but you can always get it from this page, from this you from this credential section. So I'm not going to download it for the moment. So next step, we have to create an API key. So for the API key, we have to go to APIs and services, then credential, and then create a credential API. If you don't want to follow that manually, you simply click on the go to credentials and it will navigate you to. So it's very simple from there. So again, same step here, we click on the create credential, but this time instead of OAuth client ID, I'll create a API key. So in a nutshell, what we did, we created a consent screen. There we provided the scopes for that consent screen. And then we created a OAuth client ID that we are going to use in our application. And now we are creating an API key. So API key identifies our project using a simple key. And there is a quota and the access associated with this API key, like how many requests your application is allowed to make for the Google Calendar API. So I'll simply click on create API key, and it will take a moment to create API key. Then we have API key created, and as you can see a warning here, this key is unrestricted. To prevent unauthorized use, we recommend restricting where and for which API it can be used. So this is very important. If you have to define that like this API key will be used for this particular functionality, for example, if you are allowing to do and upload it to a Google Drive, or if you are allowing your API key to use any other Google services, that you have to define specifically, because this key is very unrestricted by its default nature. So you can just click on edit API key, and this will open the section where you get option to put a restriction on it. So as you can see, by default I have an application restriction none. I can put that like a website, which website I want to allow, or the IP addresses, or the Android app, iOS app, like that I can put a restriction. And I highly recommend you do that, because it will bring an additional safety to your API key, and you will not have any problem or any trouble related to your API key being misused. So please do specify like for what website you are going to use, and don't forget to restrict this key, where we get an option to choose for like which API to use. So in my case, I'm going to use this API key for my Google Calendar API. So I'll simply choose only Google Calendar API, and we'll save it. In that way, I make this API key to be usable for only Google Calendar related stuff and not elsewhere. So with that, I have put an additional level of restriction to my API key, and it cannot be misused. So I'll simply save it. So yes, that is all what we need from the Google Developer Console. We have the OAuth to client ID created, which is demo calendar event. We have the client ID, and I also have an API key. If I refresh a page, I'll see the newly created API key here. So I have the API key and the client ID. So these are the two things that you will need in your Angular application. So now we have all the things ready which we essentially need. So we can simply go to our VS Code and create a custom application. So I have created a very fresh Angular application using ng new, and it has nothing. As you can see, it's completely empty. So we are going to create some custom components of our own, and let's proceed. First thing we need to do is we need to put in scripts of the Google's API client. So for that, we will simply put the script tag, which basically points to apis.google.com js api. So this is the JavaScript client. If we have to use a Google's API in any JavaScript application, we need to import this script. So we have the apis.js, and then we have the client from the account.google.com. So we have imported these two script, and you can see that there are two things here on load. So on load of the first script, which is api.js, we are calling a gapi loaded, and on the client script we are calling g is loaded. It means we have to define that somewhere in our application. So once I put this in my index.html, I'll need my own custom script. So for that reason, I'm going to put a script tag, which basically will point to my custom script. So I'm calling that custom JavaScript script as a Google event.js user defined script. You can put whatever name you want, and in my case, I'm going to create that in the assets folder. So I'll simply create a scripts folder here, and inside that I will create a file, a JavaScript file, namely Google event.js, and I'm going to write bunch of methods in this Google event.js, which basically will have this GAPI loaded and the G is loaded, and of course my logic, which will be used to create a event using a Google Calendar API. Now I'm going to create my own component. So I'll generate a component, namely bookings, and that I'm going to refer in my root module. So I'll simply call app.booking and closing tag. And now I should see something on my UI as there is something mistake over here, I guess. So it should be bookings. Okay, I made a typo. So app bookings, and now I can see that bookings work. So I don't have anything now yet in the booking. So inside this booking component, I'm going to create a simple form which will have three things. First is the date and time of the meeting, the date and time of the event. Second is the email address of the attendees and the submit button. So once you submit on it, then we are going to call our methods which are actually present in the Google event uh, .js file. This will be a methods which will be responsible for creating an event and accepting the details from the booking component, like this attendees email and the date time, and then making a request to Google to create that event. So this Google event.js will have the methods that will get invoked from my booking component. So I have a class card, and I'm going to put some CSS to this because I want to centrally align my form and add some background color and all that. So that's why I created a card selector. And inside that card, I'm going to put a simple title, which is a book appointment. And now here comes the main part, which is the form. So I'm using Angular's form group. I'm going to create an appointment form in my component TS, and on submit of that form I want to call a schedule meeting method that will again set in my component TS. So I'm going to have three things into it. First is my appointment time, so I'm going to call a label as a meeting time, and this will be for my control field, namely appointment time. So there I have a input type with ID, of course, appointment time, and this is going to be of type date time local because I want to accept a date along with the time, like whether it's AM, PM, what is the exact time. And then I have a email of the attendees, like who all are my attendees to whom I want to send this invitation. And finally, I have my button, which is schedule appointment, and this is of the type submit. So this will submit my form, and once the form is submitted, it will go to my schedule meeting method. So here I have my booking component, which is pretty much clean. So let's get a schedule meeting method, which we are going to call when user click on schedule appointment. So I need to create that appointment form in my component. So appointment form is of the type form group, and this appointment form is going to have these two fields, which is appointment type, which I want to put required. That's why I kept a validate as dot required, and the email is of the email type, so it puts a regular expression of the email, and again the email is also required. And then I'm going to create this create Google event as an just a variable of the TypeScript, because what I want to do is when user clicks on schedule meeting, I want to call this create Google event, and this create Google event will basically invoke my function which is present in my which will be present in my Google event.js. So I'm simply going to write one function, namely Google create event, and then put some text like it works here. So I'm going to put a simple text here like it works, and let's see if it works. So I have a couple of errors here. That's because cannot bind a form group since it's not known property of a form. So that error is primarily because if we are using a form control in our Angular application, we need to import that in our module. So we need to import a reactive forms module, and let me just prettify the code, which is pretty ugly at this moment. And now if I go here, I see a simple form where I have book appointment, meeting time, email, and if I choose any of the time and a simple email, if I click on schedule appointment, I get this message, it works from my Google event.js. So now since we have our form ready, we are going to shift our attention to setting up these callback events in our Google event.js. So we need to define this G API loaded and the G is loaded. So before we do that, it's important for you to understand like what exactly it does. So it simply means that when this script is downloaded from this URL, from this apijs.google.com/js, when we have this apijs downloaded, then and when it's loaded in our application, after that, what is the first thing that you want your application to do? So in our application, once the script is loaded, what we have to do is, and what actually should happen is, we have to initialize our client ID, we have to initialize our application. So for this reason, we have to provide the client ID and the API key that we created in the earlier part of this video. We have to use that. So let's put the client ID. So this client ID is directly coming from the client ID that I created here. So I have just copied this client ID, and I also need the API key. So the API key also I copied from my developer console. So I just put them in my const variable, and then I have a discovery doc, which you have to keep it here because it's just a URL that you will be showing on your page if you want your user to know like what are all other possibilities that you can do with the calendar API. So for that purpose, then we have the scopes is important. Remember when I was showing you on how to create an OAuth consent screen, that time I showed you like what are the scopes and what actually they do. So you have to give a scope to your client ID, that like this client ID is allowed to do what operations, like what all are the APIs that is accessible, that are going to be accessible with the client ID. So you just have to specify that here in your application. So I put the scopes as a calendar. This token clients get generated once your user has provided the consent to your application. Then this token client get generated on runtime. It is not present at this moment, and let's define that two method about which I am talking from last 5 minutes. So I have a G API loaded and the G is loaded, and in the G is loaded, as I said, I'm going to have a token client which will be generated once my user has authenticated on my page, and that I'm just simply uh, going to return. And for that, I just have to provide my client ID and the scopes from my scopes here. And then the callback, we can define something of our custom callback, but for now I don't need any custom callback, so I'll keep it simple empty, and I will turn that G is loaded flag as a true. And in my G API loaded, I will call the G API.load client, and then I have the callback method, again a callback method which is initialize G API client. Now this is the asynchronous method because it handles an uh, request to a Google server. So I will provide the API key, and then this basically initialize our client with API key and the discovery doc and all those things. And once that happens, then my line number 20 gets executed. uh, G API initiated turns to a true, and since this is the asynchronous operation, I have await put there, and this line number 20 will not get executed until and unless my G API client has initialized. Now let's come back to our booking component, and then we put this create Google event function call. So I will define that create Google event here in my event JS. So I'll simply put that method here, create Google event. And since we are creating this event on the user's calendar, we actually need a permission from user. So once they grant a permission from the consent screen, then we are going to have a token. So I will write a line like this, token client callback. It means that once we have a token client, then we are going to see whether what is the response. If there's an error in the response, then it's simply going to throw that error. But if it's not there, if it's a positive scenario, then we are going to call a scheduled event, which will be our final method. Inside that, we are actually going to call our create event API of the Google, and we need to ensure that we have that token. So if the token is null, then we are going to request access, and it's going to show a prompt on the UI to a user that they need to give a consent. And if it's not null, that means that access has already been given, user has agreed to a consent, and we have the token ready. So the scheduled event will get called once we have the token ready. Now here comes the important part. So we have to define a event object, and that event object is going to have information about our event, like what's the start time, what is the end time, what is the location, how you want to remind your user. And there are a lot of things that you can configure. You can go to an official documentation of the uh, Google Calendar API, and you can understand like what are the customization that you can do, which I'm going to put, let's say, a Google IO 2015. Then I will put a location, what it's my location, then the description of the event. Then I'll put a start time. That start time I'm going to get from my event details, which my booking component will provide. That will ultimately come from the user because it's coming from the form control. So whatever user choose on that form, that start date I'm going to get, and simply going to pass it to my uh, this event object. Then I'm going to put a time zone. So for this demo, I'm putting a Los Angeles, America as my time zone. You can put whatever time zone, but be careful about it has to be in compliance with what is the expected text by what is the expected string by the Google Calendar API. Then the end time, that also I'm going to get from the event details, and the same time zone I want to put it here. Then the preference about the recurrence, if I have to make this event recurrence, I can define that here. So I want to put that recurring, so that's why I put the frequency daily and the count as 2. Just to show you a working demonstration of it, you can put the frequency whatever you want, like weekly twice or the weekly once or the monthly once, like that. You can customize that in the R rule of your recurrence array. Then we have the attendees. So here we need to provide the email address of our attendees that I'm going to get from my event details from my form. And then a choice about the reminders, how you want to remind your user about this event. So a method of reminder is email, then the pop-up, and that will happen this minutes before. You have to pass this event object to your Google Calendar API. So for that we have this GAPI client calendar event dot insert. So this insert method basically taking care of creating a Google event. And once we have that successfully done, we have the we are showing the details of the event, and this is the HTML link. That means if you click on this HTML link, it will show you the event in your calendar itself. And this event details I want to bind with my forms data. So what I'm going to do is I will simply do this dot appointment form dot value, and inside the value I'm going to get all the details of my like time and the attendees. I will simply console log it here for your understanding. Let me go to UI and choose a date or something like this, any random date. Then I give my email ID and I just click on the schedule appointment, and there we go. I see this console log which has my appointment time and the email inside it. Now I just have to pass this details to my create Google event so that it can work. As you can see that when I clicked on the schedule appointment, it has opened and pop up, and I see like which account to use. So I click on my account which is already logged in there. Then it says that Google hasn't verified this app because we are running all the things in a testing mode. So if you go to OAuth Consent screen, you see that this is in the testing mode. So if we have to make it production ready, we simply click on the publish app. But if you are hosting your application on your own domain, then you can verify your domain, and you can simply put it there. So if you want to know like how to verify it, you can simply come here. What if I don't have verify app, and what are the trade-offs of it, and how to verify it, you can learn about it under the domain verification. So I will choose continue here. Continue it, they have to accept it, so I just do a continue on it. Then I can see that post to this has failed, and I don't have that event created it in my calendar. And if I go to why the post request has failed, I can learn about it. And if I show you a response, it says that start and end time must either both be a date or both be a date time, because the Google Calendar API accept a time format along with the information of the time zone. So I need to provide that. So I'm simply going to convert to ISO string, then slice it up to 18 character, and then this -700, this is the GMT code for the Los Angeles, America. So that's why this is the time zone indicator. Basically here it tells that in which time zone you have provided this time. So you can put it whatever you want, or in what time zone you want to schedule your meeting. Then I have an end time. So for getting an end time, I'm going to create a custom method which will be get end time, and that end time method basically have a responsibility of adding a +1 hour into my initial appointment time. And that later on I will use in my event details. So I have the email start time, end time. That's the basic things that I need for my Google event.js, for my schedule event to work. So yeah, that things I'm going to pass. Then let's define that get end time. So that's it here. Then so let's go to our browser and see if it works. So I will put 1 uh, October 2023 and 12:36 a.m. So that's my time. I'll put the email address and click on schedule appointment. This will ask for my consent. I'll provide the permission, click on continue, and now here I see it has worked. So if an event is created successfully, your Google Calendar API returns this event created HTML link. So you can verify that. Just click on that link and it will show you the event that it has created. So I chose the October 1st and the time I chose, and I can see that it is showing me it correctly. But most importantly, I can see the details that are passed, like the location, then the attendees, and the reminder about it, like 10 minutes, and the reminder, pop-up reminder, email reminder. So I can see all the details it has added. And one more thing, whenever you generate this event, you get a email in your inbox right away. So the details about the event that I created, we get an email stating the event, the invitation. You can provide the link to join. For example, if you have an event that you are going to join from Microsoft Teams or Zoom, you can simply give a link of that in your event so that your user can just simply click on that link and join your meeting. So this was the demonstration of how to integrate Google Calendar API in your Angular application. I hope you were able to understand this video. If you have any questions, any query regarding this, I'll be more than happy to answer it. And thank you for watching.